Peter Aspinu was sentenced to death for murdering Stephen Adams and Kevin Powell. He made an obscene gesture at the family of Adams.
Some killers crumble when they hear their fate, but others react with chilling resistance or eerie silence. In this video, we'll reveal the most disturbing death sentence reactions from evil criminals. One case stands out: Timothy Jones Jr., a father who sat emotionless after being sentenced to death for the unthinkable murder of his 5 children. Let's dive in.
Now on 7 News at 5:30, police working a double murder mystery after a family member expected home for the holidays never shows up.
We have 2 men who were murdered in this Wilton Manors home. Now, detectives won't tell us very much more than that. They won't say who they are or how they were murdered.
On a quiet December morning in 2010, a disturbing discovery sent shockwaves through the serene town of Wilton Manors, Florida. Inside a meticulously maintained home, the bodies of Stephen Adams and Kevin Powell, a beloved couple, were found in what police described as an execution-style killing. The crime was as brutal as it was senseless, leaving a once vibrant community in fear. Behind this horrific act was Peter Aspinu, a man with a troubled past and a chilling lack of remorse. But the full story of what unfolded and how Aspinu reacted in the courtroom made this case one of the most disturbing the state had ever seen. Peter Aspinu was no stranger to the criminal justice system. His life had been marked by a series of arrests for fraud, theft, and adult services. By the time he crossed paths with Stephen Adams and Kevin Powell, Aspinu had already developed a reputation as a dangerous drifter.
Their brother, Stephen Adams, and his partner, Kevin Powell, were found shot to death in their Wilton Manors home over Christmas 2010.
Adams and Powell, known for their kindness and generosity, had offered Aspinu a place to stay after meeting him online. But what began as an act of goodwill ended in betrayal. On December 23, 2010, Aspinu shot both men execution-style in their home, stealing their car, cash, and valuables before fleeing.
But we do know that the bodies were discovered here yesterday.
Investigators were horrified by the details of the crime scene. Evidence suggested the killings were calculated and cold-blooded, with no signs of a struggle. It was as if Aspinu had meticulously planned every step. Aspinou's escape was short-lived. Days after the murders, he was pulled over in South Florida, driving the victim's car. Inside, police found several of the couple's belongings, along with a journal detailing his thoughts, which prosecutors later used to show his twisted mindset. During his trial, the case against Aspinu was airtight. Ballistics linked the murder weapon to the crime scene, and surveillance footage placed him at the victim's home shortly before their deaths. The most damning evidence, however, came from his own words. Aspinu showed no remorse for the murders, claiming they were justified by his hatred for same-sex couples.
Read a short statement to the jury before they deliberated.
I have no regrets in my life and am proud of every decision I've ever made. Nobody here knows what really happened that day.
In 2018, after years of legal proceedings, Peter Aspinu was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. His trial became infamous not just for the horrific details of his crimes, but for his behavior in the courtroom.
Peter Aspinu was sentenced to death for murdering Stephen Adams and Kevin Powell. He made an obscene gesture at the family of Adams.
When the verdict was read, Aspinu's reaction shocked everyone. He smirked at the victims' families and raised his middle finger, a final act of defiance that underscored his complete lack of remorse. His actions left the courtroom stunned and further cemented his place as one of Florida's most despicable killers.
After what happened in that courtroom just now, I'm happy that he's put to the death penalty.
The families of Stephen Adams and Kevin Powell were left grappling with their grief and anger. The couple had been pillars of their community, loved for their generosity and compassion. To see Aspinu treat their deaths with such contempt during his trial was almost too much to bear. For the jurors and spectators, Aspinu's chilling reaction during sentencing was a stark reminder of his callous nature. Even in the face of death, he seemed to relish the chaos and pain he had caused. His smirk, combined with his unapologetic demeanor, made it clear that he had no regrets. The case also sparked conversations about hate crimes and the dangers of misplaced trust. Adams and Powell had opened their home to someone they believed needed help, only to become victims of his twisted agenda. Peter Aspinu's behavior was a cruel slap in the face to the grieving families of his victims. But the next case of Shan Finnegan takes an even darker turn of calculated cruelty.
Investigators discovering the body of Jennifer Paxton at a home on East Fairview Road. Now, documents say the victim was tortured and deprived of medical care.
In Oak Ridge, Tennessee, the murder of Jennifer Gail Paxton shocked the community to its core. Jennifer was a young woman with a bright future ahead of her, but her life was cut tragically short in a way that defied comprehension.
He's just, those eyes, I mean, just like a wild animal.
The man responsible was Shan Finnegan, a figure whose disturbing actions would paint him as one of the most cruel and callous killers in the state's history. But it wasn't just his crimes that left people horrified. It was his behavior in court that made him unforgettable.
In 2020, police in Oak Ridge, Tennessee investigate a tip that Shan Finnegan and his girlfriend Rebecca Dishman have a human body stored in their freezer.
Shan Finnegan's life was a pattern of manipulation and control, culminating in the events that would make him infamous. In December 2020, Finnegan lured Jennifer Paxton to his home under the guise of offering her a place to stay. She had been struggling with homelessness and believed this was a chance to rebuild her life. But once inside, Finnegan's demeanor shifted from kind to sinister. He held her captive for weeks, subjecting her to physical and emotional harm. Witnesses and investigators later pieced together a timeline that revealed a horrifying pattern of torture and dehumanization. The tragedy reached its peak when Finnegan decided Jennifer was no longer useful to him. He bound her with zip ties, brutally beat her, and ultimately strangled her to death. As if the murder wasn't heinous enough, Finnegan desecrated her body before storing it in a freezer, an act that underscored his complete lack of empathy. The discovery of Jennifer's body came weeks later when a tip led police to Finnegan's home. Inside, investigators were met with a gruesome scene, her body stuffed into a freezer, evidence of her brutal final moments etched into every corner of the room. Finnegan was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and abuse of a corpse. The evidence against him was overwhelming, from forensic analysis to the testimonies of those who had seen Jennifer in the days before her disappearance. As the trial unfolded, the prosecution revealed chilling details of Finnegan's crimes. It wasn't just the brutality of the murder, it was the calculated and methodical way he carried it out. His lack of remorse was palpable, creating an atmosphere of unease in the courtroom.
You can see Finnegan fidgeting as the Emmy shows the mannequin. Now, several members of the jury looked away while the autopsy photos were being shown.
In August 2024, after a harrowing trial, Shan Finnegan was convicted of all charges and sentenced to death. The jury's decision was swift, reflecting the sheer horror of the evidence presented.
Upon the verdict, the jury find you, Shan Finnegan, to be guilty of murder in the first degree as charged in the indictment. Upon further verdict of fixing the punishment of death, it is therefore ordered that you shall be put to death by lethal injection.
But Finnegan's reaction to the verdict was what truly captured headlines. As the death sentence was read aloud, Finnegan's expression remained eerily blank, a chilling contrast to the emotional testimonies of Jennifer's family. His lack of reaction was described as unnerving, as though the gravity of his crimes and his punishment hadn't registered at all. Jennifer Paxton's family sat through the trial, their grief on full display as they listened to the gruesome details of her final moments. For them, justice was bittersweet. While the death sentence brought some closure, it could never replace the vibrant life that had been taken so senselessly.
Jennifer, she just needs justice.
The courtroom was heavy with emotion during the sentencing, with jurors visibly shaken by the evidence they had reviewed. For those who knew Jennifer, Finnegan's stoic demeanor only added to the pain, a stark reminder of the inhumanity behind his actions. As news of the case spread, it sparked conversations about the vulnerability of those experiencing homelessness and the dangers they often face. Jennifer's story became a tragic symbol of how trust can be manipulated by those with the darkest intentions. Shan Finnegan's chilling lack of remorse revealed the depths of his cruelty. But the next case uncovers a predator who lurked in plain sight: Michael Gargiulo, the Hollywood Ripper.
The Hollywood Ripper. He's been called a serial thrill killer.
To his neighbors, Michael Gargiulo seemed like the perfect gentleman, a friendly face with an easy smile. But behind his charming exterior lurked a predator so calculating and cold, his crimes would horrify the nation. Nicknamed the Hollywood Ripper, Gargiulo targeted young women in the Los Angeles area. His attacks were brutal, methodical, and deeply personal. But what made his story even more chilling was how long he evaded justice, hiding in plain sight as he claimed victim after victim.
Trisha Pacaccio was 18 when she was stabbed 12 times right outside her home after a night out with friends.
Gargiulo's reign of terror began in the early 1990s when his neighbor, Trisha Pacaccio, was found stabbed to death outside her home in Illinois. Authorities couldn't connect him to the crime at the time, and Gargiulo relocated to California, a move that would prove deadly for 2 more women. In 2001, Ashley Ellerin, a fashion student, was found murdered in her Hollywood Hills home. She had been stabbed 47 times in a ferocious attack that shocked even the most experienced detectives. What made this case infamous was that Ellerin had been scheduled to go on a date with actor Ashton Kutcher the same night she was killed. Kutcher, who arrived late to pick her up, testified that he saw what he thought were red wine stains through the window, a gruesome detail that later revealed the horror inside. The killings didn't stop there. In 2005, another young woman, Maria Bruno, was found murdered in her El Monte apartment. Like Ellerin, Bruno's death was brutal and ritualistic. Gargiulo meticulously planned his attacks, breaking into homes and catching his victims completely off guard. Gargiulo's obsession with control and violence made him a shadowy predator, operating under the radar while authorities struggled to piece together the pattern of his crimes. The break in the case came in 2008, when Gargiulo targeted his final victim, Michelle Murphy. Unlike his previous attacks, this time his prey fought back. Murphy, a young woman in her 20s, managed to fend off Gargiulo during a vicious assault in her Santa Monica apartment. She survived, becoming the first person to live through one of his attacks. Murphy's bravery not only saved her life, but also led to Gargiulo's downfall. Investigators found blood at the scene, linking Gargiulo to the crime through DNA evidence. That same DNA connected him to the murders of Ellerin and Bruno, as well as Piccaccio years earlier in Illinois. The pieces finally fell into place, and the Hollywood Ripper was taken into custody. Michael Gargiulo's trial captivated the nation, with Ashton Kutcher among the witnesses testifying against him. Prosecutors painted a picture of a man who stalked his victims, broke into their homes, and carried out his crimes with cold precision. In 2019, after a lengthy trial, Gargiulo was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. During the sentencing phase, the courtroom was tense as victims' families recounted the grief and anger. Gargiulo, however, remained stoic and emotionless, refusing to acknowledge the pain he had caused. His demeanor throughout the trial was unnerving, as though he felt no connection to the lives he had destroyed. The jury recommended the death penalty, and in 2021, Gargiulo was officially sentenced to death. His case remains infamous, not only for the gruesome details of his crimes, but also for his lack of remorse.
I haven't spoken about the impact that Ashley's murder has had on me. I know that losing her has adjusted my acceptance of my own mortality.
The families of Gargiulo's victims described the pain of facing him in court, knowing he showed no regret for his actions. Ashton Kutcher, speaking about his brief connection to Ashley Ellerin, recalled the guilt he felt for not realizing something was wrong that night. For Michelle Murphy, the only known survivor, the trial was a chance to confront the man who nearly killed her. Her testimony was powerful and emotional, a reminder of the lives Gargiulo could have claimed if not for her resilience.
To bring a child into this world and to experience that joy. All I can do is think about the parents.
The courtroom was filled with a mix of grief, anger, and relief when the death sentence was handed down. But for those who knew his victims, no punishment could truly erase the scars left by the Hollywood Ripper. Michael Gargiulo's lack of remorse left the courtroom stunned, but the next case reveals a killer who smiled through his death sentence, sending chills through everyone in the room.
This is the most horrific crime that I had ever seen.
The case that cannot be forgotten.
Oh, God.
Can only someone truly insane have committed these acts?
In the summer of 2014, what appeared to be the life of a successful software engineer in Lexington County, South Carolina, concealed an unspeakable darkness. Timothy Jones Jr., a father of 5, was living a double life. A man respected at work, but consumed by personal demons at home. What authorities would uncover about Jones's actions defied belief. His crime wasn't just horrifying in its brutality, it was the deliberate and calculated destruction of his own family.
Jones and the kid's mother, Amber Kaiser, had divorced after a rocky marriage. As part of their separation, Jones received custody.
Timothy Jones Jr. had been battling personal struggles for years. A devout but a controlling man, he imposed harsh rules on his children and struggled to manage his temper. When his marriage to Amber Kaiser fell apart in 2012, custody of their 5 children was granted to Jones, a decision that would prove fatal.
I just PT'd his ass till he couldn't handle it.
And when you're saying PT, and what are we talking about?
Squats.
How long were you having him PT?
PT like an hour.
In August 2014, Jones became convinced that his 6-year-old son, Natan, had broken an electrical outlet in their home. Enraged, Jones forced the boy to perform grueling exercises as punishment, pushing him far beyond his physical limits. Natan collapsed and died. Panicked and spiraling, Jones made a chilling decision: to kill his remaining children to cover up the first murder. One by one, he strangled his 7-year-old daughter, 8-year-old son, and 2-year-old twin boys with his bare hands. He then loaded their lifeless bodies into his SUV and drove aimlessly across state lines for days, unsure of what to do next.
Tim, I'm not calling to argue or anything. I just, like, the past 2 or 3 phone calls, you've been, like, really on edge.
The sheer coldness of his actions and the methodical way he carried out the murders left investigators stunned when they pieced together the timeline.
Jones is stopped at a checkpoint in Mississippi, but there's no sign of the children.
Jones's attempt to flee was prevented when he was pulled over at a traffic stop in Mississippi. The officer, noting a foul odor emanating from his SUV, became suspicious and questioned Jones. After a brief search, the officer discovered the children's bodies in garbage bags in the vehicle's trunk. Jones was immediately arrested, and the horrific truth of what had happened to his children began to unravel. During his trial, prosecutors presented evidence of Jones's meticulous planning and lack of remorse. He had disposed of his children as if they were trash, driving across multiple states with their bodies in tow.
Who do you remember using the belt on? Were they older? Did they put up a fight?
I mean, what person's not?
The courtroom was riveted as the details of Jones's crimes were laid bare, painting the picture of a man who saw his children not as human beings, but as obstacles to his freedom. In June 2019, Timothy Jones Jr. was found guilty of 5 counts of murder. During the sentencing phase, the defense argued that Jones suffered from mental illness and emotional instability, hoping to spare him the death penalty.
And the murder of 5 children 11 years of age or younger. Now recommend to the court that the defendant, Timothy R. Jones Jr., be sentenced to death.
But the jury wasn't swayed. After hearing the graphic details of the murders and the devastating impact on the family, they unanimously sentenced Jones to death. The judge described Jones's actions as the ultimate betrayal, a father turning against the very children he was meant to protect. Jones sat stone-faced during the sentencing, showing no visible emotion as the decision was read. The courtroom during Timothy Jones Jr.'s trial was a mix of raw emotion and disbelief. Family members, including Amber Kaiser, the children's mother, expressed their grief and anger in heartbreaking testimonies. Kaiser sobbed as she described her love for her children and her regret for trusting Jones to care for them. For the jurors, the case left a lasting mark. Some later admitted they were haunted by the images of the children and the cold, methodical way Jones carried out their murders. Jones's lack of reaction during the sentencing only deepened the pain for those in the courtroom. It was as if he had emotionally disconnected from the weight of his crimes, leaving victims' families struggling to find closure. This case became a chilling reminder of how a person can appear composed on the surface while hiding unimaginable cruelty beneath. Timothy Jones Jr.'s lack of emotion during his trial showed the depths of his cruelty. But the next case takes us to Alfred Bourgeois, whose heartless crimes and chilling courtroom behavior left everyone speechless.
Home, a child killer who has spent 15 years on federal death row faces execution next month.
In December 2002, Alfred Bourgeois' actions shocked the quiet community of Corpus Christi, Texas. A long-haul truck driver with a volatile temper, Bourgeois was arrested for a crime so horrific that even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend it. The victim? His 2-year-old daughter, who was entrusted to his care during a temporary custody arrangement. But instead of love and protection, she endured weeks of unimaginable harm at his hands, culminating in her tragic death. Alfred Bourgeois' life on the road often blurred the line between work and family. But beneath the surface, his temper and desire for control made him a dangerous figure, especially to those closest to him. In the weeks leading up to his daughter's death, Bourgeois subjected her to relentless physical and emotional torment. Witnesses later described seeing the child bruised, her tiny frame evidence of the systemic harm she endured. He would force her to sleep in the cab of his truck and withheld basic necessities as punishment for minor mistakes. The breaking point came during a routine stop at a naval base in Corpus Christi. Enraged after the toddler accidentally spilled her potty training seat in his truck, Bourgeois reacted with uncontrolled fury. He grabbed her and violently slammed her head into the dashboard, an act so brutal that it caused catastrophic injuries. When paramedics arrived, they found the child unresponsive. Despite their efforts, it was too late. Her small body bore the marks of a long history of harm, including fractures, scars, and internal injuries. The evidence painted a horrifying picture of what she had endured in her short life. The investigation into Bourgeois' crimes was swift and damning. Medical examiners confirmed that the fatal injuries could only have been caused by deliberate violence. Witness testimonies and forensic evidence left no room for doubt about who was responsible. During the trial, Bourgeois' attempts to defend himself fell flat. He claimed that death was accidental, but the prosecution tore his narrative apart, revealing his pattern of cruelty and neglect. Jurors listened in horror as the evidence mounted, showing that this was not a one-time incident, but the culmination of weeks of calculated harm. It didn't take long for the jury to deliver their verdict, guilty of first-degree murder and child abuse. The sentencing was equally decisive. Bourgeois was sentenced to death. Alfred Bourgeois' crimes left an indelible mark not just on his victim's family, but on everyone who followed the case. In December 2020, nearly 2 decades after his conviction, Bourgeois was executed by lethal injection at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. His final moments were as chilling as the crimes he committed. Witnesses described him as defiant to the end, maintaining his innocence and showing no signs of remorse. It was this cold indifference that haunted those in the room, a final reminder of the man who had so brutally betrayed the trust placed in him. The execution marked the 10th carried out by the federal government that year, part of a controversial wave of federal executions. For the family of the young victim, the execution brought a bittersweet sense of justice. It closed one chapter of their grief, but could never undo the damage Bourgeois had caused. The courtroom during Bourgeois' trial was a scene of heartbreak and anger. As prosecutors detailed the horrific harm, jurors and onlookers struggled to process the depths of his cruelty. Many found it hard to understand how someone could inflict such pain on their own child. Perhaps most unsettling was Bourgeois' demeanor throughout the trial. He sat stone-faced as medical examiners described the injuries his daughter suffered. His refusal to take responsibility, right up to his final breath, left a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed the proceedings. For the paramedics and doctors who tried to save the young girl, the case was a grim reminder of the worst they could face in their line of work. For advocates against child mistreatment, it became a rallying cry to ensure such tragedies were never ignored. The disturbing courtroom reactions of these killers remind us of the depths of human cruelty and the chilling ways justice is delivered. But this is just the beginning. The next video on your screen reveals even more shocking crimes and the jaw-dropping moments that stunned the world. Keep watching.